Tatiana Schlossberg revealing that she's dying at 35 years old from an aggressive type of blood cancer. Now I have added a new tragedy to her life, to our family's life, and there's nothing I can do to stop it.
Silence wrapped the room as Tatiana Schlossberg's funeral unfolded, heavy with memories, grief, and unspoken history. Mourners expected tradition, restraint, quiet tears. Instead, George Moran stepped forward and delivered words that cracked composure and pierced hearts. His voice trembled, then steadied, revealing truths few knew and emotions long buried. Gasps turned to sobs as faces lowered, hands tightened, and the weight of the moment settled in. The air felt permanently altered. What did he say that transformed a farewell into a moment no one will ever forget? A goodbye, spoken in love, not silence. On January 5, 2026, George Moran stood where no husband ever wants to stand. He had spent his life beside Tatiana Schlossberg, through ordinary days and extraordinary ones, and now he faced a room filled with history, grief, and expectation, trying to put goodbye into words. Yet what followed was not what anyone had prepared themselves for. George did not ask the room to collapse into sorrow. He did not invite tears for their own sake. He didn't crumble behind the podium. Instead, he gently asked people to remember how Tatiana lived. He urged them to laugh when they could, to do crossword puzzles, to show up for one another as loyal friends, because those small human things mattered deeply to her. In a moment that should have broken him, he somehow found the strength to honor her exactly as she would have wanted. Tatiana Schlossberg had never been defined solely by her last name. Yes, she was a Kennedy, but her legacy was quieter and more personal. It lived in her curiosity, her compassion, and the way she paid attention to details others overlooked. George didn't frame his words around loss alone. He told a love story shaped by shared routines, private jokes, and a life built together. Everyone listening understood they weren't just hearing a eulogy. They were witnessing a rare kind of farewell, one that would stay with them long after the church emptied. The setting itself carried a heavy echo. St. Ignatius Loyola Church in Manhattan was not just another venue. It was the same church where Jacqueline Kennedy had once been baptized, received her first communion, and confirmed her faith. It was also where her funeral was held in May 1994, after cancer claimed her life at 64. More than 3 decades later, her granddaughter was being mourned in the very same space. The symmetry felt cruel, almost unbearable, as if history had looped back on itself. The room felt dense, not just with sadness, but with the weight of a family whose story has always carried both prominence and pain. As guests arrived, the atmosphere shifted further. Caroline Kennedy entered with her husband, Edwin, her expression steady but worn by grief. Tatiana's siblings, Jack and Rose, followed quietly, each carrying the loss in their own restrained way. Then came the moment that seemed to fracture the room. George walked in with their children, Edwin, just 3 years old, and Josephine, only 18 months. Too young to understand what was happening, too small to grasp the meaning of the gathering, yet their presence spoke louder than any words. They were living pieces of Tatiana, and everyone knew they would grow up with stories instead of memories. The service itself balanced formality with something deeply human. It wasn't cold or distant. People hugged instead of simply shaking hands. Grief pulled strangers closer, collapsing the space between powerful figures and private mourners. Among those seated were President Joe Biden and Jill Biden. Their presence spoke loud. Nancy Pelosi, Michael Bloomberg, David Letterman, and Seth Meyers, all blending quietly into the pews. Fashion designer Carolina Herrera was there too, the same woman who had created Tatiana's wedding dress, adding another layer of meaning to the day. Everywhere you looked, the past seemed to fold into the present, and at the center of it all was George, whose words stood apart not because they were dramatic, but because they were honest, restrained, and rooted entirely in love. But what if George's quiet words mattered more than President's presence? Did love, not power, truly command that room that day? Stay tuned. A Husband's Farewell. George Moran stepped forward into the light that streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Ignatius Loyola Church, the echoes of whispered condolences fading behind him. He paused, letting the hush of the room, heavy, expectant, and trembling with grief, settle around him. His hands rested lightly on the lectern, though every fiber of his body was holding back a storm he could not fully name. At his side, Edwin clutched his tiny sister Josephine's hand, too young to understand what was happening, yet present enough to anchor him to the life they had built together. And in that moment, George knew he had to speak for more than himself. He had to speak for Tatiana. "I never imagined I would be standing here without you, Tatiana," he began, his voice low but unwavering. "And yet, here I am, because life is cruel. And you were far too bright to stay. You left us too soon, and the world will feel that absence every day." He swallowed, eyes scanning the room. At his side, Edwin clutched his tiny sister. Friends, strangers, people who had only ever known her brilliance in headlines or in passing, but who'd gathered because they knew, like he did, that she had been extraordinary. "But I don't want you to remember her in silence. I don't want you to fold this grief over your heart and never speak of her again. Tatiana, she was alive in every single moment, even the smallest ones. She laughed at crossword puzzles like they were a personal challenge. She could tear through them in minutes and still find the time to notice if someone needed a hand, a smile, or just to be heard. She believed that life was meant to be lived fully, fiercely, and kindly. That's who she was. That's who she still is." George looked down at Josephine and Edwin, the quiet proof of her life continuing in the world. She was the mother who made the ordinary extraordinary. She made the 8 p.m. dinner feel like the center of the universe. She made every little thing, bad haircuts, arguments over ginger ale, even spilled milk, into something worth noticing. And when she gave birth, she faced life's cruelest truths with courage, humor, and dignity. That's what I loved about her. That's what made her unforgettable. He paused, letting the weight of her absence settle into the pews. "I want you all to do something for me, for her. Don't just remember her. Live like she lived. Laugh loudly. Solve puzzles with joy. Show up for your friends at 2 in the morning when they're falling apart. Listen. Speak honestly. Be present. Be brave. Be kind. That is how you carry her forward. That is how you honor her. Because Tatiana didn't waste a single moment of her life, and she would never want you to waste yours grieving her without action." A tremor passed through him as he lowered his eyes for a moment, his chest tightening. "I loved her more than words can carry, and I will spend the rest of my life showing our children, and anyone who knew her, what it meant to love fully. I will tell them about the way she saw the world, sharp, fast, and funny, about the way she made friends feel seen, strangers feel safe, and family feel infinite. Tatiana's life was a gift. Her death is unbearable, yes, but her legacy is ours to carry forward." He lifted his head, voice stronger now, raw and full of conviction. "So today, when you leave this church, do not leave empty. Take her with you. Take her courage. Take her laughter. Take her love. Live in a way that would make her proud. And if you do that, she will never truly be gone. She will be in every laugh, every kind act, every moment you live fully, as she did." For the first time, George let his own tears fall freely. He reached for Edwin and Josephine, pulling them into his arms, and the room held its breath. Not just Kennedy, not just a journalist, not just a granddaughter of a president. Tatiana had been a wife, a mother, and a presence no one could replace. And for a brief shining moment, George's words allowed everyone in the room to feel her there again, alive, fierce and laughing, even in absence. Now what question echoed as George spoke? How could quiet love bring presidents to tears and strangers into one family together? Keep watching. Love, in the midst of impossible. On the morning of January 5th, his head, voice stronger now, George Moran returned to the podium at St. Ignatius Loyola Church, his hands steady, but his heart heavy, ready to speak words that had lived inside him every moment since Tatiana Schlossberg's diagnosis. The pews were filled, the air thick with expectation, and yet George didn't aim to impress. He aimed to honor. He looked across the room, at presidents, journalists, friends, and family, but especially at their children, Edwin and Josephine, whose tiny faces mirrored the mother they would barely remember. He began with a pause, letting the weight of silence settle. Tatiana wrote once about the day everything changed, he said, his voice low, deliberate. November 22nd, 2025, the same day her grandfather was shot in Dallas, 62 years ago. She described swimming a mile the day before her diagnosis, feeling strong, healthy, unstoppable, and then, suddenly, cancer. That is how life flips. The words carried across the church like a quiet thunder. George let the memory breathe before continuing. From that day, there was no time to process, no time to be afraid, just treatment, chemo, immunotherapy, bone marrow transplants, every step. A battle she faced with courage I can't explain. Her sister Rose gave everything she could. Jack tried anyway. They tried everything clinical trials could offer. Hope, endless hope. And yet, nothing could have prepared her for what she worried about most, the children. George's gaze fell to Edwin, then Josephine, and the room seemed to shrink around him. She carried their faces inside her eyelids, he said, voice cracking. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw them, and she knew they would not remember her. Edwin might catch flashes. Josephine, only photos. She never got to bathe her, never fed her, never changed her diaper. Her life began and ended with the battle that started the day she gave birth. And the guilt was unbearable. The audience was silent. George did not pause for effect. He simply let the truth land. But she was not alone. I never left her side. I made the calls she couldn't make, talked to doctors when she didn't want updates, handled insurance when she had no energy. I slept on the floor of her hospital room night after night. When the steroids made her furious, Canada Dry, not Schweppes, mind you, I didn't argue. I understood it wasn't about ginger ale. It was fear, pain, losing control. And I tried every single day to make life feel normal. Love, she reminded me, is a verb, a choice, a decision. George paused, letting the congregation absorb the intimacy of his words. She called me a genius, he said softly, a small, sad smile touching his lips. Funny, handsome, but kind. Kind in ways that matter when life stops being romantic and starts being real. She said, "Not everyone can be married to a doctor, but if you can, it's a very good idea." That line broke people, because it wasn't just about helping, it was about survival. It was about making it possible to keep going when the world had stopped for her. Then George's voice rose slightly, carrying the room with him. Tatiana and I married September 9th, 2017, a simple fall day on Martha's Vineyard. Not tabloid, not flashy, real, us. And in that realness, we lived a lifetime together in every day that followed, even as she faced a disease no one should face, especially not a mother. And though I could not save her, I tried, like hell, because loving her was a choice I would make 1,000 times over. He looked out at the crowd, steadying himself. "This is what makes her story different," he said, voice rich with meaning. "Not the awards, not the Yale degrees, not the books or the essays, though they were remarkable. It's the love. It's how you show up when someone can't do it alone. It's how we carry forward, through the children, through our actions, through laughter, through kindness, through life itself." Tatiana asked us all to be better, to live faster, to love harder. And we will, because that is how she lives on. The room was silent, yet charged. Every heart held her in that moment, and George, standing tall in unimaginable grief, made the audience understand what it truly meant to love through the worst, and to keep moving, even when everything feels impossible. How did one man's quiet words turn unbearable grief into a promise of living on, through love, children, and courage? Stay. A love that lived in every moment. George Moran stood before the congregation, his eyes tracing the faces in the pews but always returning to the children, Edwin and Josephine. His voice was steady, but every word carried the weight of a lifetime compressed into too few years. "Tatiana," he began, "was not just brilliant, not just a Kennedy, Not just a journalist or a writer. She was a mother. She was a wife. She was a force of life and care in every moment. And even when the world turned against her, when cancer tried to claim her too soon, she was thinking of others. Always others. He paused, letting the room breathe with him. She wrote once in The New Yorker on November 22, 2025, the same day her grandfather was shot in Dallas, 62 years earlier. She swam a mile that morning, felt strong, healthy, unstoppable. And then, in a heartbeat, she was a patient. She faced treatment immediately. Chemo, immunotherapy, bone marrow transplants, and every step of the way, her thoughts were of our children, of the life she wanted them to know, of the time she would never get back with them. George's hand rested lightly on the podium as he continued. She worried about Edwin seeing only flashes of her, about Josephine knowing her only in photographs. She never got to bathe them, feed them, or change their diapers. Her life became a war for survival the moment she left the delivery room. And still, she never let the fear, the pain, the injustice of it steal her care, her attention, her love. The audience leaned in as George's voice softened. I slept on the hospital floor beside her, night after night, while she fought harder than anyone should ever have to. When the steroids made her angry, only Canada Dry, not Schweppes. I did not argue. I understood. I knew it wasn't about ginger ale. It was fear, pain, losing control of everything. And through it all, she continued to be the kindest person I have ever known. She called me a genius. Yes, handsome, funny, but she always said I was kind. And kindness, that is what mattered most when life stops being romantic and starts being real. He looked down at Edwin and Josephine, small and fragile in their seats, and his voice broke just enough to carry the truth of every sleepless night, every unspoken worry. Tatiana did not just fight for herself, he said. She fought for us, for our family, for the future. Even in the darkest days, she loved fiercely, thought boldly, and carried hope as if it were a weapon against the impossible. She was brave enough to call out wrongs, even from those closest to her, even when she knew it might cost her peace. She did not flinch. She did not compromise her honesty. And yet, she never forgot her children, never forgot the small moments, the love that lived in the ordinary. George inhaled slowly, holding the audience with him. We married on September 9, 2017, on Martha's Vineyard. Not for the cameras, not for the headlines, but for us. She wore lace, delicate, simple, designed by Carolina Herrera, and I wore a soft gray suit and pastel tie. We were quiet together, yet powerful in the life we built. Every photograph, every memory, every touch of that day now carries a weight I cannot put into words, because it shows the joy we had and the life that cancer tried to steal too soon. His eyes swept across the church again. Tatiana gave her life to love, to care, to protect, and to fight. She gave her life to Edwin, to Josephine, to me, to the people around her, to the truth she would not compromise. And while I could not save her, I can honor her by sharing her care, her brilliance, her courage, her heart. That is how she lives on, with us, in every act of love, in every moment we choose to be kind, in every fight we face, with courage. That is the gift she left behind, and it is ours to carry forward. The congregation held their breath, not just for grief, but for the clarity, the truth, and the magnitude of what George had revealed. This was not a farewell wrapped in sorrow. It was a testament to love so complete, so lived, that it became impossible not to feel it, impossible not to carry it forward. What did George reveal in that final breathless silence that transformed grief into purpose and left a church changed forever? Stay with us. A blueprint of love and courage. George Moran looked across the crowd, and his eyes rested on the tiny, trusting faces of Edwin and Josephine. He spoke slowly, letting each word carry the weight of the woman he had loved with every fiber of his being. Tatiana, he began, was more than brilliant. She was the heart of our family. She cared with a depth that cannot be measured, not in awards, not in accolades, but in every small act of love she gave. Even in the hospital, even in the middle of the fight she never wanted, she thought of others first. He paused, his gaze shifting to the children and then to the faces of family and friends. She wrote in the New Yorker on November 22, 2025, the same day her grandfather was shot in Dallas 62 years earlier. She described disbelief, the suddenness of it all, swimming a mile one day, feeling invincible, and the next facing cancer. There was no time to process, no time to be afraid, just treatment. Chemo, immunotherapy, bone marrow transplants. Hope stretched beyond reason. And yet she worried most about Edwin and Josephine, about how little they would remember her, about the moments she would never get to share. George's voice softened, shaking just enough to remind everyone that behind the strength was grief so deep it could drown a lifetime. She never got to bathe them, never fed them, never held them to sleep in the way every mother dreams. Her life turned from delivery room to diagnosis in a single heartbeat. But even then, she cared. She cared about us, about everyone who crossed her path. And I tried to carry that care with her. I made calls when she couldn't. I handled the doctors, the insurance, the endless updates she didn't have the energy for. I slept on the floor beside her, night after night, because love, she taught me, is a verb, not a feeling, a choice, a constant action. He let the audience feel the weight of her courage. When the steroids made her angry, "Only Canada Dry," she screamed. I didn't argue. I understood. It wasn't about ginger ale. It was fear, pain, losing control. And yet, she remained kind, sharp, witty, strong. Even as the disease took hold, she fought with clarity, with grace, and with love for our family. She called me a genius, handsome, funny. But above all, she said I was kind. That word, that truth, mattered when life stopped being romantic and started being real. George's eyes filled with tears, but he did not look away. We married on September 9, 2017 in Martha's Vineyard. Not flashy, not for the world. Real. Tatiana wore lace designed by Carolina Herrera. I wore soft gray and pastel tie. We were calm, but the love between us spoke louder than any words ever could. Every photograph captured not style or legacy, but presence. And just months before she passed, the last family photo shows her smiling straight at the camera, eyes bright, calm confidence intact, holding Josephine while Edwin leaned into her, and me, just staring at her, seeing the light in her that never dimmed. That image broke people because there was no sign of sickness, no hint of the battle she had already begun. Just love, just life. He paused again, letting the truth settle like a weight in the room. Tatiana lived fiercely, honestly and unapologetically. She called out injustice, even in her family, even while she was dying. She stood up for science, for mothers, for those without power. But even then, her concern was the children. Her love for them never wavered, even as the world tried to steal her away. She wrote about it all, leaving breadcrumbs for me, for us, so that her care would not end, so her children would never truly be without her guidance, without her heart. George looked out, meeting every gaze, letting his words challenge and inspire. And so I ask all of you, not just to remember her, but to live her. Laugh loudly, help fearlessly, speak honestly, be kind without pause. Do the crossword puzzles, think quickly, love fiercely. Be the person Tatiana would have been proud to laugh with. That is how we honor her. That is how we carry her forward. That is how we survive her leaving. Every person in the church felt it. This was no ordinary eulogy. This was a map for life, drawn by a man who loved so completely, who lived alongside her so fully, and who refused to let her light fade. George Moran didn't just say goodbye. He handed the world a blueprint for love, courage, and care, and a reminder that the truest legacies are not written in history books, but lived in hearts. So, what do you think made George Moran's farewell so unforgettable? His grief, her courage, or the children's silent presence that spoke louder than words? We'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.